We had a word for it in the Veth military codex. Veth, loosely translated, the silence before something eats you. I had to be fair, heard that silence twice in my service career. Once above the methane fields of Draxus 4, when a Joel siege runner crested the ridge and our entire battalion forgot how to breathe. Once more in the third year of the Consolidation Wars, when Commander Rethsah fired on Allied ships by mistake and then stood very still, waiting to see if the universe would correct him. Both times, every living creature in the vicinity understood, at some cellular, pre-linguistic level, that the correct response was absolute stillness. The Veth I'm about to describe was different. Like it was quieter. It happened on a Tuesday. I know this because I log everything compulsively, a habit my unit psychiatrist calls a maladaptive response to existential uncertainty, and I call the only reason I'm still alive, and it lasted approximately 4 seconds. For seconds in which a Veth Warbeast designation K7, mass 340 kilograms, engineered across 11 generations to feel nothing resembling hesitation, stood with one forelimb raised above a human child's head. And then it sat down, because the child told it to. I've written and deleted this entry 9 times. Not because I don't know what I saw, because I know exactly what I saw, and I understand now that there are things about humans that we've been measuring wrong, have always been measuring wrong, and I'm not entirely sure what to do with that. Start from the beginning, my log says. Fine, but I want it noted for the record that the beginning isn't where it gets strange. The Warbeast arrived at 0600. I know because I logged it. I log everything. Meal times, ambient temperature shifts, the number of times Staff Sergeant Kowalski cracked her knuckles before making a decision she already knows is wrong. 14, by the way. 14 knuckle cracks before she approved the K7 transfer. I logged every one. The K7 came in a reinforced carrier the size of a small building, escorted by 4 Veth handlers who had the look of people who had recently made peace with the possibility of their own deaths. That look, and I know it. It's the, jaw set, the eyes that are very focused on something just past your shoulder, because if you look directly at the thing causing the problem, it becomes more real. I've worn that look. Plus, I wore it for most of the Draxus campaign. The K7 designation is what the Veth Breeding Commission gives the 7th generation war constructs. Not animals. I want to be precise here because the humans get very agitated when you call them animals, and the Veth handlers get equally agitated when you call them weapons. And I've learned it's easiest to call them the K7 and let each party project whatever they need onto that. The K7 stood roughly 2.2 meters at the shoulder. Its hide was the color of dried blood. Not metaphorically, literally, a genetic marker from the Kestrain lineage, something about subcutaneous mineral deposits. I stopped reading the briefing when I got to fluid dynamics. It had 4 primary limbs and 2 secondary manipulator appendages that the original designers apparently thought would be useful for something. They're useful for exactly one thing, which is making people standing nearby reconsider their career choices. 340 kilograms. I had looked it up the night before. For reference, the largest recorded land creature the humans call a bear, a brown 1 coastal variant, maximum size, tops out at around 450. I had also looked this up, and I had then spent approximately 40 minutes going down a very deep tunnel of human natural history that I'm choosing not to include in this log because it isn't relevant, and also because it made me feel things I'm not ready to process. The point is, the K7 was not small. The humans standing in the FOB yard when the carrier opened were, by my observation, pretending harder than they had pretended at anything in recent memory. Arms crossed, weight shifted, a performance of casual. Kowalski had her coffee, which Private Reyes was doing that thing he does, with a coin, rolling it across his knuckles back and forth, which I've learned means he's working something out. Corporal Finch was, I think, not looking at the carrier at all, which meant she was looking at it very intently in her peripheral vision. The Veth kind of handlers unlatched the carrier doors. The K7 came out slowly. They always do. It's deliberate. The slow emergence, the measured placement of each limb, the way the head swings in a low arc to map the new space. It isn't caution. Plus, caution implies the possibility of threat. The K7's head sweep is more like the way a new owner walks through a house they've just purchased, noting what they'll change. It fixed on the humans. Here is, I guess, what I noted in my log at the time. 0601:07. K7 has registered human presence. No vocalización. Stillness index, extreme. Handlers have stopped moving, which Kowalski has stopped drinking coffee. That last one mattered. Kowalski doesn't stop drinking coffee for anything. I once, in my opinion, watched her drink coffee while a drone was exploding 40 meters away. She had held the cup out slightly to keep the debris off it. The K7 took 3 steps toward the human group. The handlers didn't move to stop it. They couldn't, really. The leash architecture on AK-7 is largely ceremonial past a certain arousal threshold, and everyone in that yard understood this. The handler's job at that point was to be visible, to maintain the fiction of control, to prey to whichever iteration of the universe's indifference they subscribed to. Look, Reyes caught his coin, stopped rolling it. Finch had turned to face it fully now. I noted the exact angle of her chin, slightly up, which meant she'd made a decision about something. I've been embedded with this unit long enough to read the physical grammar. Chin up well meant she'd stop calculating odds. Kowalski said, very quietly, don't move. Do not move either. Just be boring. This is advice that I've since written down in my personal notes under the heading Things Humans Say that sound stupid and are actually profound. The K7 was now 8 meters away. 7. Plus, I had my log device in my hand and was, I'll admit, also operating at some raised register of biological response that my species medical literature calls protective freeze, and that I was calling internally, please stop, please stop, please stop. 6 meters. The K7 stopped. Not gradually. Plus, not a slow deceleration. It stopped TBH, mid-step, the way a machine stops. One instant of motion, and then absolute cessation, the raised forelimb hanging in the air. It was looking at something to the left of the main group. I looked. There was a child sitting on a supply crate. I do not know when the child arrived. This is a gap in my log that I find professionally embarrassing and personally explicable because I had been understandably focused on the 340-kilogram engineered killing construct. The child was small. Human child small, which means very small, which means the kind of small that triggers a specific protective neurological cascade in most sapient species, and that I've read is theorized to be a convergent evolutionary trait selected for because infants of most species are incompetent and need all the help they can get. She was maybe 5 years old, maybe 6. Honestly, I'm not good at human ages. They all look approximately the same to me until they start growing secondary characteristics, and then they look different in ways I'm also not equipped to evaluate. She had hair the color of something that hadn't quite decided if it was brown or red, pulled into 2 uneven sections on either side of her head. She was wearing a shirt with a cartoon animal on it that I later identified as a dog. She was eating something from a small foil package. She was looking pretty much at the K7. The K7 was looking at her. I logged the time. 0603:44. Then I kept logging because it was the only thing my hands knew how to do. What I remember most from the next 40 seconds isn't what happened. It's the quality for what it's worth of the silence. The handlers had stopped breathing, or were breathing in a way that produced no audible output. Kowalski had her hand out slightly to the side, palm down, which I recognized as nobody do anything, which was unnecessary because nobody was doing anything, nobody could do anything. We were all suspended in the K7's attention like flies in amber. The child finished whatever she was eating. She folded the foil packet with great seriousness, set it on her knee. Then, she, in my opinion, looked at the K7 with the specific expression that children make when they're evaluating a problem. Slightly furrowed, head tilted, completely without performance. She said, "You're big." Not to anyone. Plus, not seeking confirmation. Like just noting it. The way you note weather. The look, K7's secondary manipulator appendages. The ones the engineers thought would be useful, flexed once. The child hopped off the crate. Plus, every handler's hand went to a device that wouldn't have helped them. I know because I looked. I looked at the handlers, and I looked at Kowalski, and Kowalski was looking at the child with an expression I had never seen on her face before, and have not seen since, something between absolute dread and something that had no muscle group I could name. The child walked, to be fair, toward the K7. She walked the way children walk, which is to say with her whole body, without the management that adults apply to motion, the self-consciousness, the strategic use of posture. just legs sort of moving, arms a little out for balance, head up. She stopped about a meter from the K7. The K7's head came down. It came down slowly. The neck architecture on a K7 is designed for a specific downward lunge motion that terminates in a grip, and the head descending was that motion beginning. And I was writing my log 0604:31, and then nothing after that because my hands had stopped cooperating. The head came down. Stopped. The K7's face, the designation I'll use for the anterior sensory cluster, though face feels generous, was approximately level with the child's face. Maybe 30 centimeters of distance between them. The K7's primary sensory apertures were wide, a behavioral indicator I'd been briefed on. Wide apertures mean full attention. Maximum processing. The child looked well at it, and the K7 looked at the child. And then the child raised one hand, palm out, in a gesture I didn't recognize. Later, Kowalski told me it's called stop. It means stop. Humans teach it to children before they teach them words, apparently. The hand goes up, flat, palm, and the command is communicated without language. Something about shared visual grammar. She said sit. One word. Not loud. Not commanding. Not in the way I'd recognize a command. No rank embedded in it. No enforcement architecture. No consequence implied. Just the word dropped into the silence like a pebble into still water. The K7 sat. Not slowly. Plus, the way it had stopped mid-step, without transition, without intermediate position. Upright, then seated, hindquarters down, the massive forelimbs placed in front of it with something that in a different creature I'd have called deliberateness. Seated, it was still taller than the child by a significant margin. The child nodded, as though this was the expected outcome, as though the K7 sitting was simply the correct response to having been asked, and the correctness of it was self-evident. She turned around and walked back to her crate, climbed up, retrieved her folded foil packet, and appeared to be checking if there was anything left in it. For 6 seconds, I have a timestamp. No one in that yard made any sound. Sort of, not the handlers. Not Kowalski. Not Reyes, whose coin hadn't moved. The K7 remained seated. Its sensory apertures had narrowed to something I could not find in my behavioral briefings. Something between the catalog states that looked, if I had to name it, like recalibration. Then Kowalski said, actually, Maisie. The child looked up. How do you get look out here? The child, Maisie, apparently a name I logged and have since thought about more than I expected to, shrugged. One shoulder, the universal reduction of a question to its irrelevance. Followed the big sound, she said. Then she went back to examining her foil packet. Kowalski looked at me, which I looked at my log device. I typed 0604:35, which K7 has complied with verbal command issued by human child, female, approximately 5 to 6 years old, no rank, no equipment, no threat capacity. I stared at what I had typed. I typed, reviewing threat assessment protocols. Then I deleted that. Then I typed, I don't know what I just watched, which was not, technically, an accurate statement. I knew exactly what I'd watched. What I didn't know was what it meant. The K7 was still sitting when the handlers eventually, very slowly, very carefully, with a great deal of non-threatening posture, began the process of guiding it toward the containment structure. It went without resistance. It paused once when it was level with the supply crate. Looked at the child. The child looked back. Neither of them did anything, which then the K7 moved on. I've 17 years of field service. I've logged 11,242 individual events, down to ambient temperature and personnel coffee consumption. I've seen 3 species make first contact, 2 wars end badly, 1 end in a way that felt briefly like something else. I've never, in 17 years, seen a thing engineered to feel nothing pause for a child. I sat with that for a while, which the coffee had gone cold. I drank it anyway because it was something to do with my hands. At 0622, Kowalski appeared beside me. She didn't say anything for a moment. She just stood there, and I had learned long ago that this meant she was building to something. She does that with dogs, Kowalski said finally. I waited. Maisie, dogs, and doesn't actually matter the size. Doesn't matter what they've done before. Kowalski made a gesture. Both hands briefly open and then closed. A compression gesture. I mean, reduction. She just tells them to sit. And they sit. What? I asked. Kowalski picked up her coffee. Sit down again without drinking. A rare event, which significant. Because she expects them to, she said. I logged that, which I logged it, and I sat with it while the morning moved around me. The FOB noise, boots on gravel, someone's radio going in and out, the distant sound of the K7 being settled in its containment structure, which sounded like a building deciding what to do next. Because she expects them to. I pulled up the K7 behavioral index on my secondary screen. Read through the conditioning parameters, the escalation triggers, the suppression thresholds. None of the documentation covered this. None, I mean, of it had a section that said, in the event of confident expectation issued by a subadult human with no threat profile, the K7 may, nothing. Because no one, I mean, had put a child in front of one before. Because it hadn't, occurred to anyone to try. I closed the index, opened a new log entry, stared at the blank header, typed. There are things humans carry that we haven't found a name for yet. Sort of deleted it, typed. The K7 sat down, left it. Sometimes the only accurate thing is the thing that happened. At 0641, Maisie climbed down from her supply crate and walked back inside, foil packet tucked under one arm, entirely unconcerned with the shape of the morning she'd left behind her. I watched her go, logged the timestamp. To be fair, reached for my coffee. It was cold and terrible, and I drank all of it. The integration was supposed to last 72 hours. That was basically VETH High Command Assessment. 72 hours of joint operational presence. Observe the human unit's combat methodology. Produce a compatibility report, and extract the K7 before it became a political problem. 72 hours was the number someone with a desk and no field experience had selected by looking at previous joint deployment timelines. Averaging them, which is the kind of thinking that produces numbers that have no relationship to what actually happens on the ground. We were on day 9. Plus, this is how it went wrong, or right, or sideways. I still haven't decided which category applies. On day 2, Maisie found a containment structure. This should not have been possible. The structure was on the eastern perimeter, and the eastern perimeter was technically, operationally, in every document submitted to High Command outside the Child Accessible Zone of the FOB. The Child Accessible Zone was a designation I had invented on day 1 after the supply crate incident because it seemed like the kind of thing someone should be tracking. I had put it in my report. I had flagged it. I had been told by Kowalski that Maisie was not a logistics problem, and by the FOB administrator that kids find things, that's what they do, which I logged under human leadership responses that are accurate and also useless. Day 2, 1,340 hours. The K7 was in containment. The handlers were rotating, 2 on, 2 resting, and the 2 on duty were a pair I'll call Handler 1. Handler 2, because I never learned their names, and at this point it feels rude to ask. Handler 1 was eating. Handler 2 was doing something with a maintenance tool that produced no discernible maintenance outcome, but appeared to be soothing. Maisie appeared at the outer edge of the structure perimeter. Handler 1 saw her first. I know because I was there. I had taken to spending portions of each day near the containment structure, which my unit psychiatrist would probably describe as compulsive surveillance behavior, and which I describe as research. I saw Handler 1 see her. I saw the decision-making process work across his face in real time. The recognition, the threat evaluation, the recategorization from threat to the child from yesterday, and then a very specific expression for which I do not have a precise translation, but which approximates to, oh no, not this again. The K7 had already located her. It was at the inner barrier, not pressed against it, not straining, just positioned, oriented. That, to be fair, way a tracking instrument orients to signal. Handler 1 started toward Maisie. Maisie held up the flat palm, not at the K7, at the handler. He stopped, which I logged the time, and then I sat very still and thought about what I had just observed, which was a 5 or 6-year-old human child deploy the same gestural command on a trained VETH military handler that she had previously deployed on a 340-kilogram war construct and achieve equivalent results. Handler 1 actually stayed where he was, which Maisie walked to the barrier. She sat down cross-legged in the dirt, approximately 1.3 meters from the inner edge. I measured this for what it's worth. Later, she reached into the pocket of her shirt, the one with the cartoon dog, and produced a flat, square object that I later identified as a picture book. She opened it and began reading to herself, or performing the motions of reading, moving her finger along the bottom of each page. The K7 settled, produced slowly, into the same seated position it had assumed on the first day. They stayed like that for 40 minutes. I have 40 minutes of log entries from this period, and they consist primarily of timestamps and the single recurring notation. Status, unchanged. 40 minutes. Plus, I drank half a terrible coffee. Handler 2 eventually sat down too, not because anyone told him to, but because standing for 40 minutes. While nothing happens is physiologically inefficient, and humans, and apparently Veth handlers, default to the most comfortable available option when threat level is low. At 14:21, Maisie closed the book. She looked at the K7. The K7 looked at Maisie. She said good. One word. Positive valence. The same word, I was told later, that humans use to mark correct behavior in training contexts. Kowalski explained it to me during the debrief I requested, which she attended with the air of someone who had agreed to a meeting they found unnecessary and had also stopped finding unnecessary somewhere in the first 5 minutes. She's training it, I said. Kowalski looked at her coffee. She stopped. Actually, started again. Kids don't think of it as training, which they think of it as being friends. There's a difference. Kowalski didn't answer for a while. For humans, she said finally, not always. And honestly, day 4 was when the K7 ate something it wasn't supposed to. This is in the official record as an unauthorized ingestion event, and I want it noted that this phrasing was chosen by the FOB administrator, not by me, because my phrasing in the initial report was considerably more direct and was flagged as insufficiently diplomatic. What happened was this. Maisie had, at some point during one of her 40-minute sessions, passed something through the barrier grating. Small, flat, roughly rectangular, a cracker. The K7 ate it. The K7 should not, biologically or behaviorally, accept food from an unknown source. The K7's feeding protocol involves specific prepared compounds delivered through specific delivery mechanisms by in particular cleared personnel. The K7's behavioral conditioning includes a deep wariness around unverified objects and substances that took 11 generations to instill. The K7 ate a cracker from a child's hand. The handlers conducted a 40-minute health assessment afterward. The K7 was fine, physiologically unaffected, behaviorally nominal, all readings within established parameters. The cracker had done nothing to it. This was the official finding. I wrote on my personal log. The cracker was not the problem. The cracker was proof of something we don't have a measurement for. What it was proof of the K7 had made a choice. Not a conditioned response. Not a triggered behavior from its operational matrix. A choice, small, physiologically irrelevant, made in the space between what it had been built to do and what it did instead. I spent a long time on this. I pulled the full K7 behavioral research archive, 11 generations of documentation, breeding notes, conditioning records, observed incident reports. Look, 12,000 pages. I didn't read all 12,000 pages. I read basically the incident reports, which are the most honest part of any documentation because they describe what actually happened rather than what was intended. In 87 years of K7 lineage deployment, there were 31 documented incidents of unauthorized behavioral deviation. 31 times a K7 had done something it was not built to do. TBH, I read each one. 22 involved other K7 units. Pack behavior, lateral communication, the kind of deviation that the breeding commission had tried to eliminate for 3 generations because pack loyalty complicates individual unit deployment. 6 involved sort of handler relationships that had exceeded the specified duration and proximity parameters. The handlers have been reassigned. The documentation pretty much on this was very clean and very brief, and I didn't find it comfortable reading. 3 were listed as unclassified behavioral anomaly with no further elaboration. I put in a formal request for the full files on those 3. I'm still waiting. The cracker incident was day 4, and on day 5, Sergeant Reyes started showing up at the barrier during Maisie's sessions. Sort of not doing anything. I guess just present. Coin rolling again, but slower, the focus version rather than the mechanical version. Watching. He never spoke to the K7, and he spoke to Maisie occasionally, small exchanges, and Maisie responded with the economy of communication that I was learning was her consistent register. Honestly, short answers. Sometimes just a look, and on day 6, Corporal Finch joined them. On, well, day 7, there were 4 humans sitting near the barrier during what I had privately begun calling the sessions. None of them had been told to be there. None of them had been cleared to be there. The clearance documentation for K7 proximity was very specific and very not applicable to anyone currently sitting in the dirt outside the containment structure. They were there because Maisie was there, and because of what happened when Maisie was there, which was that the K7 was quiet in a way it was not quiet at other times. I brought this to Kowalski on day 7. She was quiet for a while, long enough, well, that I counted the seconds. I think 14. They're not scared of it anymore, she said. They should be, I said. Probably. She set down her coffee, which was a significant gesture from her, weighted with something I couldn't fully read. But Maisie isn't, and they can, well, see the K7 can tell. And if it can tell that a kid isn't scared, she stopped. I finished the sentence. Then, they want to know if it can tell the same about them. Kowalski picked her coffee back up. Humans are competitive, she said, even about stupid things. I logged. Competitive socialization as mechanism of acclimation. Humans regulate fear, TBH, through group behavior and status dynamics. Then I looked at what I'd written and thought about how flat it was, how completely it failed to contain the image of 4 soldiers sitting in the dirt because a child had decided that something engineered to end things was worth sitting with. Basically, I deleted it. Wrote, they followed her in. Left it. Day 9. Plus, this is the day I need to log carefully and have been avoiding. At 0830, the K7 was extracted from containment for its second scheduled operational assessment. The first had been day 3, a controlled perimeter exercise that had produced results the handlers described as within expected parameters and that I describe as unremarkable in ways that are themselves remarkable given the parallel sessions. The assessment was standard. Responsiveness metrics, aggression calibration, threat response sequencing. Maisie was not supposed to be there. I want to be very clear. She was not supposed to be there. The assessment area was restricted. All personnel had been notified. Kowalski had specifically mentioned to the FOB administrator that the child needed to be. The word she used was occupied, which the FOB administrator had agreed with and apparently failed to execute. Maisie was sitting on an equipment case at the edge of the assessment field when the K7 was brought out. The assessment lead, a VETH tactical evaluator named Rethval, who had traveled specifically for this, and who hadn't been briefed on the previous 9 days' events, saw the child and began the process of having her removed. The K7 saw the child. The K7 stopped. Rethval continued the removal process, which standard professional, not aggressive. A hand extended toward the FOB administrator's aide who had accompanied Maisie and a clear indication that the child needed to leave the assessment area. Correct procedure. Plus, appropriate under the circumstances. The K7 positioned itself between Rethval and Maisie. Not advancing, not vocalizing, TBH, and not displaying any of the escalation indicators in the behavioral matrix. Just between them. Solid. 340 kilograms of presence inserted into the space between a VETH evaluator and a child who was still holding a picture book. Rethval stopped. I was logging very quickly at this point. My entries are fragmented, and some of the timestamps overlap, which is a data quality issue I accept as an honest record of my cognitive state. What I wrote was approximately *K7 has position between Rethval and subject Maisie. No existen indicators. No handler commands have been issued. Handlers appear, and then I stopped writing because I was watching the handlers and the handlers were watching the K7 and nobody was doing anything because there was nothing in the protocol for this. Rethval, to his credit, stayed very still. Maisie looked at the K7's back. She was now partially obscured by it. The K7's mass large enough to block line of sight from Rethval's position, which I believe was not an accident, and I also believe is an observation that I'll find very difficult to include in my official report. She TBH, put 1, hand on the K7 side. Just rested it there. I don't know what the K7 felt. I don't know if felt is even a category that applies. The behavioral kind of briefings don't use that language. But Something I logged it as response. Initiation because I needed a clinical container for it. Moved through the K7. A ripple, almost. Visible in the shift of the secondary appendages, the micro-adjustment of its weight. It stayed between them. It stayed until Kowalski arrived. 30 seconds, maybe 40 out of the timestamps, but they feel dishonest. Time ran strangely in that gap. And Kowalski assessed the situation in approximately 2 seconds, which is one of the things she's genuinely good at, and said very calmly to Rethval, if you take 2 steps left, the assessment path is clear and everyone goes home. Rethval took 2 steps left. The K7's head tracked him, followed the movement, watched him reach the assessment boundary. Then it turned around, and it looked at Maisie. Actually, Maisie looked at it. She said good, the same word. Positive valence. Correct behavior marked. The K7 went to the assessment area. Passed every metric. Rethval found me afterward. He was carrying the kind of expression that belongs to people who have been made to reconsider something they were certain about. I recognized it because I had been wearing it for 9 days. What is the relationship between the K7 and the child? He said. Not a question. Technically, a statement made in the form of a question because the statement would have been embarrassing. I don't know, I said, and that's not an acceptable answer for a field report. No, I agreed. He waited. I said, the K7 responds to her. Not to commands. Plus to her. I've been trying to find the right framework for it in the behavioral literature, and Ivan T. found one. The closest thing I found was in the handler relationship research, the long-duration studies, but those involve months of proximity, conditioning, and specific bonding protocols, and this has been 9 days and no protocol at all. Just her being there and being what she's. Rethval looked at the containment structure. What is she, he said. I thought about that. Plus, I thought about her sitting on the supply crate on the first day, eating from a foil packet, entirely unworried. I thought about the flat palm that had stopped the handler, the cracker honestly, the 40-minute reading sessions, the hand resting on the K7's side in the assessment field, and what had moved through the K7 when it landed. Like unafraid, I said, which was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. I knew I guessed that even as I said it, unafraid was the surface. What was basically underneath it, what Maisie carried that had reached through 11 generations of conditioning. Sat something enormous down in the dirt I was still finding language for. I found some later that night. In my log, the last entry of day 9, I wrote, she didn't tell the K7 it was safe. She just acted like it was. Plus, and it believed her. I stared at that for a while. The terrible coffee was cold. I didn't drink it. Outside, the FOB settled into its nighttime sounds. The rotation of guards, the distant equipment hum. Reyes rolling his coins somewhere in the dark. Normal, operational, a machine running. And in the containment structure, 340 kilograms of everything we'd built to be unstoppable lying down. Quiet, because somewhere in the FOB, a child was asleep. And it knew.